Welcome to Woodbury Writes podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Carlson, and I'm here today with horror writer John Opalenik. He is the author of The Primeval Part 2, The Blue Beneath the Mountain, Among the Willows, and Other Strange Tales. He is a member of the Horror Writers Association, and he is a fourth grade teacher living with his wife, his dog Zoe, and they are expecting the next member of their family, Ben, in the very, very near future. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I don't usually read horror fiction, but after I met you at the Norwalk Indie and Local Writers Day, and I bought a copy of The Primeval, I was absolutely hooked on your writing and the world you create. So
thank you.
Would you just tell us about yourself as a writer and how you came into writing in this genre?
Sure. I mean, a lot of the basic things. Obviously, I have 3 novellas and a collection of short stories, but you just went over the titles quite eloquently. I've been writing for, since I was a kid. I started delving into the world of, trying to get my writing out there to an audience when I was in college with poetry and short stories. And I was sort of bouncing around between genres. I'd always been a horror fan. And when I finally said I'm going to write my horror novel, I realized, oh no, I'm a horror writer. It has this sort of self-replenishing well of inspiration. I can write whatever genre, but that's the one that it's very exciting to write, and I've just always got the next thing coming.
What do you find exciting about it?
It gives you this nice catharsis and sort of a safe way to experience the danger and chaos. It's kind of like a roller coaster. It's scary, but at the end of the day, you can walk away from it and be fine. And it's also a nice lens to look at some of the actual scary things in our world, but with enough removal where it's not stressful. It can be sort of cathartic, and it's just a lot of fun.
And in The Primeval, you create a world that is of this world and not. And I found as I was reading it, like I was saying in our conversation, is it a spiritual world? Is it an underworld? What realm is this? Where does this exist in our psyches? And the experience for me as a reader is it felt very real, very relatable.
Right. I do like it to be grounded in a world that we recognize, and perhaps suggest the idea that there's just a lot more to this world than maybe we are aware of, and sort of playing in that space and starting in a place of familiarity makes it feel more real and hooking readers and myself as a writer. I need to be interested in the story if I'm going to write it.
And reading your work and that world that you create, and as a ninth grade English teacher who works with a lot of different mythologies, it seems to me that the horror genre does what mythology does in terms of establishing that cathartic experience, and even in some ways elevating the ordinary into the extraordinary so that we can figure out how to deal with it, as you said.
Oh, absolutely. And then even, the creature or ghost or what have you is in the story is often a stand-in for a real life issue that we are dealing with. I mean, The Primeval, there's a lot of idea of self-destruction and greed personified by the antagonist. I don't want to give too much away, but by the antagonist.
Yeah. Do you find that you draw on mythology or the horror literary tradition for any of your inspiration? Do the creatures that populate your novels, do they have a history?
Oh, sure. I mean, I like to, whether I am borrowing from some form of mythology or from, classic monsters, I always like to put my own twist on it and think, again, oh, maybe there's more to this world. Maybe, I'm just going to go with a werewolf because it's my favorite classic monster. Okay, maybe the stories that we have about the classic werewolf, maybe they came from somewhere and it's not quite what we've seen in other stories or movies, but maybe it sort of came from somewhere, which is nice. It sort of gives readers an on-ramp to beginning to understand what's going on, but also doesn't give them all the solutions. Like maybe the silver bullet dealing with the werewolf is nothing. Maybe that's just made up for some other story. Maybe it's something different completely. So I like to sort of piecemeal it together, sort of, I guess, Frankenstein together my monsters from other sources and, a few things that hopefully feel fairly unique. I also like to borrow a lot from nature. A lot of what you see in The Blue Beneath the Mountain. I was on a road trip through the American Southwest, and in New Mexico, there's a place called the Blue Hole, which was actually my working title for that book. And it's in the middle of the desert, and it's just this, I think it's like 100 feet deep, just blue watering hole where people, go cliff jumping into it. And if you live in New Mexico and you like scuba diving, that's kind of the place to do it. I had an opportunity to, do I jump in? Do I go for a swim? And I was like, wow, this doesn't belong here. And it's hundreds of feet deep. And then there's caves at the bottom too. Well, let me put something in those caves and we'll see how that works. I could borrow from nature or from my own experience as well.
And you do create a very tangible world in your novels. So I just want to attest to that.
Thank you.
Who's your favorite author? Do you have one in your genre?
In my genre, probably Clive Barker. He's written the book that the novella is called The Hellbound Heart, but it's what the movie series Hellraiser is based off of. But he also does a lot of like dark fantasy, and he even has a YA fantasy series, which my wife and I really enjoy. I am also a big Neil Gaiman fan who also kind of lives in that dark fantasy realm. Some of his works are spookier than others, but and also deals with mythology. I'd say those are my top two, and I just think within my genre, probably Clive Barker's more of the name that you hear a lot.
That speaks to me. I am a big Neil Gaiman fan, and and I think the darkness he conjures speaks to the depth of his humanity. He's an incredibly compassionate person and engaged in the world and across the disciplines. I mean, he's definitely a genre buster, Oh,
absolutely.
So it's I always love to hear that name in these conversations.
Of course. And one thing that I think both authors have in common that I just admire so much and I find really inspiring is they are just driven to create. I mean, Neil Gaiman, he writes, books for children, all the way books that are super not for children, everything in between, some things that are kind of indefinable. And Clive Barker, he writes his novels, again, across genres. He's also a very talented painter, film director, and I was listening to an interview about Clive Barker, and they said, oh yeah, this guy's always writing a novel with his right hand, painting a painting with his left hand, and in the back of his mind also directing a movie. He just can't not create, and I find that really, people that are like that, no matter what the artistic medium is, I just find so inspiring.
They are, for sure. And I know, and Gaiman is hard to place in terms of a location, right? He's British. He spends a lot of time here. He's got an Australia connection. Is place important to you in your writing?
Yeah, I would say so. I am a dyed-in-the-wool New Englander. I am from Connecticut. I could never imagine leaving New England. Again, The Blue Beneath the Mountain was inspired by a trip to the American Southwest, but I always in my work tend to find myself pulled back to New England. And in the horror author tradition, there's so many names, big horror authors that are all kind of something spooky about New England.
Well, there are some dark patches in our past for sure.
Oh, for sure.
Could you just tell us a little bit about the Horror Writers Association and what that's about? What is membership entail?
Sure. It is, I'm part of the Connecticut chapter, but it is part of a nationwide organization, the Horror Writers Association, where we help kind of cross promote one another, build each other up. There's also the Bram Stoker Awards, which is run through that. It's just a big community of writers where we'll support one another. So, hey, would you like to read the novel I'm working on? Or it's Bram Stoker season, so a lot of horror authors are sending me like, here's something I'm trying to put out there for the short story category, which is great. I'm getting a lot of fantastic stories sent my way, and it works out for everybody. And at the Connecticut chapter, we're a group of a handful of authors, and we meet regularly and think, how can we not just promote our writing, but also use our writing as a vehicle to kind of get out there in the community and, be part of events. We're looking to do more with libraries. Hopefully a lot coming from the group in the near future.
Got it. And how does somebody get in touch with the Horror Writers Association if they're, do you have to be a professional? Do you have to have something published or?
There are several levels of the horror writers community. One of them is just you are a fan, and it's, there's a small contribution. I think as if you join as a fan, it's like $5 a year, a little bit more expensive. It's, as a teacher, I'm thinking, oh, it's kind of like paying your union dues.
Right.
And then there's people who are attached to the literary community, like librarians, booksellers, and they join at another level. And then they have access to a lot of that stuff that's being put up for Bram Stoker awards as well. And then there's different levels of being an author on there. So I'm, an affiliate writer, which I guess translates to you are an author, you are making some money off of your work, but maybe don't quit your day job just yet.
And is it search up Horror Writers Association online to find where that is?
Absolutely. The Connecticut chapter has its own website. The nationwide organization has a greater website with links to the different state chapters. And then from there, you can also find individual authors. It's a nice little community. It's a lot of times looking from the outside is like maybe a little intimidating, but the people in the horror community are just a bunch of teddy bears, just some of the friendliest people you'll find. And it's funny, I've heard that quite a bit, even people who are like, oh, you're playing, Jason in the movie, or like this, you're closer to 7 feet than you are to 6 feet. And and they're just like, oh no, but this is like the nicest guy you'll ever find. It's a really cool community to be a part of. And I really enjoy sort of having a foot in both camps of the horror community and the local Connecticut literary scene, I guess you would say, engaging with librarians, booksellers, readers, very nice groups of people.
Yeah. And speaking of very nice groups of people, do your fourth graders know that you're a horror writer?
They are aware, and they keep asking me to write something that they can read, because I sort of tell them, like, once you hit high school, pick up my book, email me, I'll sign it for you, whatever you want, but let's hold off for now. They are aware, and I try to, without delving into the actual content of my stories, say like, well, when I'm teaching writing class, well, here are some things that authors do, or here when I'm helping people come up with ideas for stories. Well, sometimes we start with, oh, this time I went on a trip and it gave me an idea for a story. Maybe you could do that. So they're aware, but not reading it, obviously.
So they'll grow into the genre knowing that the writers of it are nice people, right? As you said, teddy bears and good people, and it's
for sure. And just like Neil Gaiman, he's very present online, standing up for people, and being a very productive member of the literary community. Even like Stephen King is very similar in that.
Yeah, let's just bring this back to your work. I know we don't want to give too much away, and I think would you be game to read from your book and just share some of your literary voice with us?
Sure, I could read one of the short stories from my latest book, Among the Willows and Other Strange Tales.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to give a little snippet from one of my longer short stories, the titular Among the Willows, and I'll just give a little bit of an on-ramp just for context. This is a very strange moment in the story Among the Willows. And just for context, all of the stories in this collection are set in the American Old West, and Among the Willows follows a young woman named Loretta who is looking to start her life over, and she does so via staging a robbery with a band of outlaws, and they are trying to escape the law, and they go through the woods, and in the middle of the woods they camp out for the night, and that's where we pick up. A blood-curdling scream shook everyone awake and brought them to their feet within seconds. The sound of a horse struggling and then crying out in pain caused everyone to assume one of the horses had escaped, or maybe a wolf got to it with their lookout unaware. They raised up their weapons and rushed to the tree where they'd tied their horses for the night. Lucky held up a torch he'd fashioned from the remnants of the fire to illuminate the scene amid the orange glow. The group saw horses that were spooked but otherwise unharmed. Morgan glanced apprehensively at the rest of the group. Y'all heard that too, right? As if in reply to his question, another hideous scream issued into the night, this time more primal and accompanied by a wet ripping sound. Lucky turned around, torch first. Maybe someone took their horse off a cliff and landed at the bottom of the ravine. He led the group back toward the jagged rock wall where the sound seemed to be coming from. As they approached, they saw a paint horse on its side writhing and kicking, and a pale, gaunt figure hunched over it. Lucky pulled the hammer of his pistol back with his thumb, making sure he did so loud enough for the shirtless figure to hear. "Turn around," he ordered. The shape lurched forward over the fallen horse one final time and turned around while tearing a patch of flesh from the horse's throat. With his broken teeth, he turned and snarled. This ghoul of a man growled, "Lucky," and lunged forward at the group with his jagged teeth bared. Lucky fired a shot that connected with the creature's jawbone on its right side and turned the top right quarter of his skull into a red mist. "What in God's name was that?" Joaquin asked. "I don't think God had nothing to do with whatever it was." Lucky holstered his pistol and made eye contact with Morgan. Morgan felt a sense of accusation coming from Lucky and asked, "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Did you get a look at that thing?" Lucky nodded down at the corpse. "If you weren't standing right in front of me, I'd have bet anything that was you." "What are you talking about?" Morgan's voice held a blend of confusion and anger. "He's right," Loretta spoke up. "That thing looked like you." "That's bullshit," he rasped in a harsh whisper. "If you were so concerned with who that thing was, maybe you shouldn't have blown his head off, Lucky." "One way to find out." Anton gave a resigned sigh and knelt over the body. He gently held what remained of its chin and turned the head, revealing the other half of the face had remained. All the eyes went from the body on the ground up to Morgan. They looked at him with a blend of sympathy, confusion, and fear. He stepped back and put his left hand up as if gesturing for them to stop. His right hand gripped his revolver. "Why are you all looking at me like that?" He took a step backward. Anton stood up from where he still crouched over the body. "Morgan, don't act like you don't see it. That's either you or your twin brother, and you don't got one of those." I'm going to leave it there.
Well, thank you for sharing that tantalizing excerpt from your short story collection, John. Your versatility with the two very different genres, right? Short stories have a different effect altogether than a novel necessarily.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it provides different opportunities. We have in a short story, I can, maybe do something that's really out there or really different, and I play with that idea for, a few dozen pages, where maybe we'll see how that would work in something longer.
That's interesting. So the short story can become sort of a testing ground or a proving ground for some ideas or for some characters.
Oh, definitely. And if single author short story collections are my favorite way to get to know an author, because you notice, oh, these are motifs that keep coming up, or this is, you get sort of it's like the appetizer sampler when you go to a restaurant, a little bit of everything.
Fair point. And you know what? That worked for James Joyce, right? And he later on in life said that was his best work, his short stories.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. So you've got an impressive body of work already. You're a school teacher. You've got a baby on the way. What else is ahead for you?
Oh yeah. Well, among all of that, I'm in the first round of editing of a novel that I just got. I just got that back from my editor, and we're looking into it. The current title is Driftwood. We'll see what it ends up being. It's about a young woman named Christy Greenwood who is sort of starting her life over after a messy breakup and sort of a realization of the state of her life and what it had been. And she's sort of finding herself spending the winter at a family cottage in the sort of like a family beach house in the off season. And there's also three mysterious people with very unique beliefs. And one of their beliefs is that Christy is special and that she is the one that's meant to fulfill a prophecy, regardless of what it costs her. So it's a self-renewal, self-reinvention, and maybe other people having plans for you. So that's a novel-length piece that I'm working on editing right now. I've also got two short stories that I just finished, and I'm going to be editing and trying to find those a home. One is called Four Horsemen Meet in a Diner, and as the title suggests, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, they get breakfast at an American diner, and they're each kind of discussing their strategies of how they're getting everything they can out of humanity without pushing it a little bit too far and actually ending things. and they're sort of discussing strategy and, having their bacon and eggs. And another one that I have is, as a school teacher, we hear a lot about active shooter drills and all of that. And I did one set in an alternate America in which horror movie slashers like the Jasons and the Michael Myerses of the world are just a thing that happens occasionally. And it's sort of an in-service training following 3 public school teachers. And, it's sort of like a thinly veiled satire, but through a horror movie lens of them just going through their in-service training of what if a horror movie happened here? How do we deal with that? The horror genre is a nice way to look at things that might just make us very depressed when we just look at it directly, and we can experience it with enough removal and enough of a metaphorical veil over it that we can explore these ideas and not walk away depressed.
Well, that is got a public service element in the world we live in now too, John. I mean,
Oh, certainly. I mean,
opportunities to blow off some steam or to imagine.
absolutely. And I would, of course, I write my novels to entertain, but also if I could do some good in the world, or at least, make some people who are dealing with some real life issues feel a little less alone, or be able to kind of explore that in a way that's also entertaining, I'd like to be able to do that.
That's great. And I think that places you in the long tradition of literature that has served that purpose. And my mind is going back to the myths again, where we kind of started this conversation. I think the arts and the literary arts are so much a part of the experience of being alive and making sense of the whole process.
Oh, definitely. It's what we always go to, whether we're whether we're trying to distract ourselves from the world, or feel better about things, or it always comes back to some form of art. It's what we go to.
That's great. And thank you for enlightening me and our listeners on the genre that you write in, on the horror genre, and the kinds of things that you're working on. I wish you every success and a happy, safe delivery of your baby.
Oh, thank you so much.
And just to remind our listeners that if they want to find out more about you and get to all your social media links and just get a deeper sense of your work, then they can go to johnopalenik.com, and we'll have all those details in the podcast notes for easy access.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, John.